Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another edition of Real Talk. We're continuing our UK tour and today I'm in the West London Academy here in Middlesex. Now today we're going to be looking at an issue which I think is really relevant today. Is Islam a threat to Western society and to democracy? Why do so many people here in the West actually fear Islam and fear Muslims? Well, that's what we're going to be having a look at. Those are the issues we're going to be discussing here today. And to help me discuss those, I'm joined by an expert panel, which I'll just introduce now. First, I'm joined by Qudsi Rashid, who's a lecturer and human rights lawyer. Assalamu alaikum, welcome to Real Talk. Secondly, we have Fareed Ahmed, spokesman for the Ahmadiyya Muslim Association here in the UK. Assalamu alaikum, welcome to Real Talk. And last but not least, I'm joined by Yas Mahmood Saab, who is a student at the UK Ahmadiyya Institute of Languages and Theology. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Real Talk. So that is our expert panel, and obviously, as you can see, we have a fantastic turnout here for the audience as well. I can see they're all willing to put forward their points of view. Qudsi, I want to start with you. We're talking about Muslims integrating into Western society, but I think first of all, we have to define what Western society actually is. So can you shed some light on that, please?
I mean, it's such a broad question about what is the West. I mean, the West, is it Europe, America, Western countries? What are Western values? And obviously, there's a great discussion that can be had about the nuances of quite what the West means. But I think for the purposes of what we're thinking about, I mean, we can kind of split it into kind of two areas. There's the legal political issues about what the West is and its values such as liberalism, liberal democracy and secularism. I mean, these are things that since the 19th century have been the hallmark of the West as a whole.
And for us, can you just define what secularism is?
I mean, secularism is this idea that religion shouldn't take part in the mainstream of society,
so
of how
it's the
governed.
Separation of religion and state. Is
Precisely,
that right? Okay.
that law should be secular as opposed to have a religious source or effect.
Okay.
So there are those kinds of issues about what the West is. But there's also, and I think equally as importantly, there's questions about the moral and social values of the West. And I think those can be split up broadly into two categories. And I think there's the positive qualities that the West has always been traditionally famous for. So the idea about learning and knowledge, the West has always been, at least in the recent past, the seat of the search for knowledge, the great universities, this desire for science and for arts and for literature, and those kinds of positive values from an educational perspective. And then also, I mean, I think historically, perhaps more so than today, there's the so-called kind of Christian values about being good to your neighbour, about kindness, about love and about tolerance. And a lot of those do come from this notion of liberalism, this idea that people should be free to do what they want to do and people should be left for free choices in their own. And there's also the negative elements, I think, within Western values, particularly we see more modern elements of it, sexual promiscuity.
We'll touch on that later on in the programme. Fareed, just turning to you, I mean, from the what Qudsi's defined there, do you think that it's at odds with Islam, and do you think as a Muslim that we're completely different to Western society? Because people, obviously, especially in the media, all I hear is the Islamic world and the Western world, and they seem to be these two opposite things that are opposed to each other. What's your view on that?
I think, as Qudsi was mentioning, it's quite clear and important to have clear definitions in your mind. And one of the fundamental values is that you're talking about two different things. You're talking about a religion and a religious philosophy, Islam, and a geopolitical part of the world, the West, which is then associated with certain values. Right. So you're comparing two slightly different things. You're comparing a religion with a part of the world, essentially. And also the values that Qudsi mentioned about liberalism and fairness, to be honest, that's a fluid definition over time. In the past 100 years, yes. If you go back in history in the West, the values are very different. So that tells us that, you have on the one hand Islam, which is understood by Muslims as a universal, timeless message. So it needs to adapt and fit into societies everywhere and throughout different periods in history. And the West, which is the current state of play, which is deemed to be liberal and more sort of soft and gentle in its nature, with the values of education and caring for animals and caring for people with disabilities and those sort of things. So I think when we say, is Islam a threat to the West, we need to be clear which part of the West we are looking at. Is it the values? Is it the geographical part of the West? And which part of Islam are we looking at? Is it the religious teachings, which are about peace? Or is it the way Islam is portrayed, which is the actions of certain Muslims that can be contradictory to Islam itself? So in many ways, Islam and the West are perfectly compatible. In other ways, depending on how it's projected, you could say they're incompatible, and that's what needs to be looked at into more detail.
That's what we'll be discussing today. Iyaz, just turning to you. I mean, is there such thing as an Islamic society rather than a Western society? What would you add to that?
I think if we interpret society to mean a culture and cultural values, then absolutely not. There's no such thing as an Islamic culture, because Islam is a universal religion. It's a way of life which all people can adapt to in their current societal makeup. If we read the Holy Quran, there is teachings which tell us how we can achieve peace and harmony at different levels of society. Whether we look at it from an aspect of interreligious peace, we see that Islam presents a principle like none other, where all prophets of God are equal, in the sense that you must believe in all of the prophets of God. And this is something which is special to Islam, because other religions don't have these teachings. A Christian may be good to the Holy Prophet ﷺ out of his courtesy, but if he is to believe in the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, he does away with his religious doctrines. Islam says no, all prophets are to be respected and believed in. Then when we look at economic peace, we see that Islam teaches that it is the right of poor people to receive a portion of the wealth from the rich. And that's why the Holy Quran says that when you do charity, don't think that you're doing a favor upon these people, because they deserve that wealth from you, because they are also a part of your society. And then when we look at this from an aspect of society, what kind of a society in general does Islam work to create? You see that we talk about justice in the Western world, but Islam is beautiful because it takes it past justice. Allah says in the Holy Quran that Inna Allaha ya'muru bil adli, He tells you to be just, but then He goes one step further and even further, that you should reach a level of ihsan. Ihsan means to give more than what the other person deserves. And then it goes even a step further and says that you should reach a level of righteousness where you give like you give to kith and kin, like a mother gives to her child without any desire for reward whatsoever. So this is the beautiful society which Islam works to create.
I want to bring the audience into this now. I mean, you as Muslims, young Muslims living in the West, obviously you've got an idea of what it is to be living in this society, but at the same time, you know, you have your Muslim identity and your beliefs as well. So just generally from a general perspective, if I could just take the microphone, I'm going to come around and just ask you what it means to be a Muslim and what it means to be, living in the West, and are they compatible? Yeah, I'm just going to come take a seat next to you. Yeah, what do you think about it?
Basically, there's some things that are compatible and some things that are not compatible, right? And in that case, not just Islam, in which religion, it's every religion that the bad things, for example, premarital relationships and etc., are not compatible with Islam. It's no religion which condones it or supports it. So, but people are afraid of sort of saying that Islam is a threat, because we tend to, as Muslims, we tend to practice our religion a little bit more in detail than a lot of other religions on a whole. So that's why it feels like it's a threat that we're trying to impose our opinions on others, even though we're not.
Yeah. Okay, so just going back to the panel, I mean, there seems to be a fine line between practicing your religion and imposing on society. So Fareed, I mean, how can we draw that boundary of, we want to practice our religion, but we don't want other people to feel that we're imposing it on them?
I think it comes back to the issue of how Islam is perceived by the general public, and the perception is driven by the media coverage. So it's seen as the way the Afghan society is run, it's seen the way the Saudi society and other countries where religion is actually imposed to a degree on the people of that country. That's the problem, is that the true Islam is very different from that. Islam is not a religion of coercion, and I think the issue here is how do you actually convey and educate the general public so that they understand the difference between the religion and its teachings and the actions of its people. So we as Muslims would have a duty to explain the teachings through both talking about it, but also through our actions and the way we behave. And I think through that, over time, people will develop a better understanding of what Islam is, and that'll remove this perceived threat of Islam being imposed on the West.
I think that's a great time to bring the audience in again. A lot of you professionals, you're working, you're students, so how do you deal with that, being a Muslim and maybe being at work? Is it an issue to be a Muslim and have a professional life in this country?
I think it can be. It depends on what level of a Muslim you want to be, and how integrated you want to be into society. I think it's broadly sort of three areas. People who are more focused on being 100% the perfect Muslim, and then on the other extreme you've got people who are more focused on being 100% the perfect Westerner, fully integrated. And then I think you've got probably the majority of the people who kind of try and find a balance in between, who want to be a good Muslim, but at the same time they want to be integrated. And I think that's where the challenge is.
Yeah. Okay, just turning to you, are you working, are you studying at the moment?
I'm working at the moment, yeah.
And how do you find that? Do you find it is a challenge maybe to find a space to offer your prayers or speak to your colleagues about Islam?
It is. I think it's. You find that there's always apprehension when you're trying to stand out of the crowd, but also keep your identity. But I found myself, personally speaking, that where I work, there are Muslims who don't represent Islam in the way that I see Islam. So I'm lucky in a way that there's a lot of hypocrisy where I work. For example, I have friends who they won't eat non-halal meat, but they do drink alcohol.
Right.
So that gives me an opportunity where the other non-Muslims ask me, why is this? Why don't you drink? Why don't you? It gives us an opportunity to advertise ourselves as the way we want to be seen. The difficulty I found is that when I do want to pray, it does cause friction, because to the Western society, someone praying, it does seem like an extremist element,
right,
because they don't understand why we're doing it. So I've had to take the time to actually explain why I'm doing it and what my thought process behind that is.
The point there, which I think is a really interesting one, which might be worth drawing out as well, is that what do people see when you say to someone, an agnostic, a Christian in the West, what is a Muslim, what is Islam? I mean, again, just like there are many different, how do you define the West? How do you define a Muslim? How do you define Islam? And most people judge Islam by the practice of certain Muslims. I mean, particularly extremist Muslims, particularly Muslims they see on the news in other countries that are acting in an oppressive or unjust manner. And they say, well, that clearly is Islam. But I mean, the straightforward answer to that point is you don't judge a religion necessarily on the practice of some of its extremist adherents. I mean, you wouldn't judge Christianity by the actions of the Christians in the Crusades, for example. You wouldn't judge atheism by the actions of the Nazis. So equally, you shouldn't judge Islam by the actions of certain extremist
because at the moment, it just seems that that's in majority in the world. If you look at the Islamic world, it seems that the Muslims in the majority are living their lives like that. I think that's why people are actually judging Islam in that manner.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that the majority of Muslims, you're talking about, more than 1 billion Muslims in the world, and to say that the majority of them are extremists is, I think, factually wrong. I think the way it works is that the way it's projected is that the majority of what you hear about Islam is negative. Right. So that's what informs the prejudices that people have. Similarly, I think, to be fair, that when you're talking about integration, you need to be clear, how do you describe what is a fully integrated Muslim in the Western world? How can you actually say, well, I can look at this person and say he's fully integrated because of what? Is it because of the way he dresses? Is it because of the way he has given up part of his faith? So I think there needs to be a clear understanding that integration doesn't mean losing your faith, losing your identity. It means fitting in, and for the host society to also adapt, because they also benefit from people living in their society. The people coming in also benefit from living in. So it's a two-way process, and there's a demand on both to understand and move towards a common goal. So it's not a burden just on one, it's a burden on both.
Right. Yaz, I'd just like to ask you, I mean, as a Muslim, what are the benefits of integrating into a Western society that maybe, isn't an Islamic state or doesn't follow a particular religion? What benefits are there for a Muslim to integrate?
Well, firstly and foremost, we need to realize that the Western society, quote unquote, however you want to define that, whether it be Britain or Canada or the US, these people, they have qualities. And Islam recognizes that. That's why the Holy Prophet ﷺ said, Al-hikmatu dallatul mu'min, that wisdom is the lost property of a believer. He takes it wherever he finds it. So we see that the British people have very wonderful qualities, like the establishment of justice. And this is something which the promised Messiah ﷺ has quoted again and again in his books, that the British people have given me such rights of justice that perhaps I could not even find this justice in other Muslim countries. And then, in addition to that, we see that the concept of education, which is promoted by the British people and by the West, this is something which Islam also accepts and encourages. You see, if you look at the Arab society at that time, women were so thrown out of their rights. their rights were so greatly infringed upon that if a girl was born in an Arab family, the father would put his head down in shame and even sometimes bury his daughter alive. These were the atrocities which were committed at that time. And you see this man comes and he says, no, don't do that. Give your girls rights, give your women rights. And then he said, not only give them rights, teach them. And the Holy Prophet was the first person in that society to come and say that not only is education necessary for men, but also for women. So the benefit of integrating with society here is that we will be able to take some good things from them and tell them about some of our good things, and we will be able to share. This is a two-way street which we need to appreciate.
I want to stay on this topic for a bit longer and come to this side of the audience to get you guys involved in the discussion. We talked about the benefits of a Muslim integrating a society. You as a Muslim, what can you offer society in general? Someone watching the program who's not Muslim thinking, there's Muslims coming into this country, how can we as a community actually integrate and be of benefit to society?
You see, we should look at the first part. When we came into this country, when we're the second line generation, when we came into this country, this kind of government actually supported us. They provided us with a lot of facilities which perhaps a lot of people didn't have in the native countries. The same way, we actually do have the rights to show people that we are welcoming, we do accept the society. We've been brought up in this culture. We do fit in this society. We provide some form of health service to people. We pay taxes as well. I mean, there's a lot of things that we do, like even charitable works. We go and help out feeding homeless people. We go out collecting charity for the elderly. So I mean, there's a lot of things that people need to understand, that Muslims are in this day and age are not necessarily just about, they're practicing religion. They are told to fit in the society. And Islam tells you that wherever you are, you do respect the government and you do respect the law of the country that you're living in.
Okay, all right. But at the same time, that's a valid point. But there are people who choose not to integrate. Just turning to you, I mean, there are Muslims in this country who want to maybe impose Sharia law. They would openly go on protests and say that's what they want. They would, protest against the troops, UK troops, and their actions. And, they want to keep their own identity, and they keep completely separate. So, I mean, you as a Muslim living in this country, what would you say to people who have that viewpoint, maybe, and why do you think that might be, an issue? That might be a negative viewpoint to hold.
I think that maybe some people come from abroad, from other Muslim countries, they come here, and in their countries they have less rights than the UK government is giving them, and maybe they take advantage of the other rights they get here, like freedom of speech, and maybe they go over the top. So my advice to them would be, to try and support the country you're living in. The justice that we have in England is probably bigger than the justice in other countries, in Arab countries.
Right.
So try and support the government, try and get behind the troops. They recently, for example, they're going to Libya, for example, and they are trying to do a noble cause. They are trying to get rid of the dictator, so we should get behind them. And if they come back and then you be rude to them or say bad words to them, that it's wrong.
Yeah. Kudsi, you want to add something?
Well, I mean, there's 2 points I want to just make briefly, following up from that. I mean, the first one is about Sharia law. It's just a very basic point, which is, the thing about Sharia law is there's a huge misconception about what Sharia law is. I mean, people, as soon as you say the buzzword Sharia law, everyone thinks, I'm going to get my hands cut off, or I'm going to be forced to do X or Y or Z.
Well, coming from a legal perspective, can you just explain it a bit then?
Well, I mean, Sharia law, actually, when you look at its very basic source, is the idea that there are certain divine laws for how people should live their lives. Now, irrespective of the content for it, and we can come back to it if we want to discuss about that, one of the fundamental aspects about Sharia is freedom of choice. I mean, the whole point of Sharia law is that a person has to be able to choose whether or not they wish to follow what they think to be is God's laws, or whether they wish to say, no, I'm choosing not to follow God's laws. The element of choice is absolutely essential to the following of Sharia law. And the second point I wanted to make about the way to express yourself or whatever is that it's perfectly legitimate for a Muslim to say, I think that troops going into other countries is a good thing and I'm going to support it. I think it's equally acceptable for a Muslim to say British troops going into a country to topple a dictator is not a good thing. Both are perfectly Muslim views. There is no Muslim perspective on that. The only Muslim position is justice, and whatever is just is up to a person to choose what they believe is to be just. And that's actually one of the great things about the West, and you touched upon it there, is that in this country you're quite entitled to say either of those political views, and it's perfectly acceptable to take those views. And what isn't acceptable is the way that you express their views, either with disrespect or with violation of laws.
Okay, fantastic. Fried, just turning to you, if you want to add something to that.
Well, I was just going to pick up the point about the issue about loyalty and how do you express your views, whether you support or disagree with decisions made in this country. I mean, one of the issues that's hit the press recently was the whole thing about poppies, and some Muslims were in the press burning the poppies as a protest or as what was perceived, rightly I think, as an insult to our troops. Now, Islam is quite clear on the question of loyalty and support for troops. You know, there's no question we will support the troops of the country in which we live. Loyalty to the homeland is part of our faith. We cannot take any difference with that. The way the Ahmadiyya Muslim community responded to that challenge was that we actually raised money for the Poppy Appeal because we feel it's important to show that support, not just in words, but through our actions. So we raised £20,000, donated it to the Poppy Appeal in honour of the troops who fought to give us the rights that we enjoy. The right to have this debate here today is based on the fact that we have people willing to stand up and fight for those rights. But it's very important that the right to have a view, to express that view is different, and the loyalty to the homeland and the loyalty to the people who protect the homeland is different, and you shouldn't confuse the two issues.
I mean, you talked about their loyalty, but coming back to integration as well, I mean, what is the Ahmadiyya community doing to help Muslims integrate into this country? What are some of the, the initiatives we've taken?
We've been in the UK since 1913, so we're certainly one of the most oldest and established communities. In terms of integration, it comes back to the role of educating people, both within the community itself, about their role as people coming into society and how they should demonstrate the values of Islam to people around them, as well as educating the society around them about what the true Islamic values are. If you remove that perception, then you can actually take steps forward towards proper integration. If I'm always suspicious about you because you dress differently or because you look differently or behave differently and don't understand the values and the reasons behind that, then there will never be true harmony, there will never be true integration. So the community has been active in opening the doors of its mosque, inviting people in actually engaging in outreach, telling people that the values of loyalty, freedom, equality, respect and peace are all values that Muslims believe in and are part of Islam. So that first barrier can be removed, then we can move towards integration and a better understanding between us.
All right, I want to get some more points of view from the audience about loyalty, because I think that's quite an important topic. Where do your loyalties lie? Are you loyal to your home country or the country you're living in? Gentlemen there, if you've got a point you'd like to add to that?
I don't think you have to be loyal to your home country and not loyal to your homeland as such. I think you can do both. You know, my parents are from Pakistan, but I was born and bred here. I am loyal to this country. I abide by the laws of the land, but I also, I love Pakistan. I appreciate, everything about Pakistan as such. So I don't think you have to be one or the other. You can be both.
Fantastic. All right, we just need to... yeah, go on. Just quickly.
That, again, it comes back to what you were saying earlier, the fact that Islam is not a culture. Islam is a framework of divine principles that you adhere to. It can fit into any culture whatsoever. So you don't need to say, I'm loyal to Pakistan or I'm loyal to India or I'm loyal to wherever, because it's almost irrelevant as far as the perspective of a Muslim goes. You can have your loyalties to where your parents are from. Personally, I don't. I mean, my parents are from India, but I've always seen myself as English, British when it comes to my culture. That doesn't interfere with me living my life as a Muslim. And again, it's one of the great beauties of Islam, is that it provides that framework within which this rich cultural diversity can flourish. Okay,
fantastic. Let's move back to the audience. We've talked on some key topics, and we've got the microphone over here, so I'm going to go with you. Talking about loyalty, talking about integration, what are the issues that you face, and are there any personal examples, or maybe do you have Muslim friends who don't want to integrate and are disloyal to this country and are happy to show it, or what do you see from the media and from what's around you?
When it comes to integration, for me personally, I feel that there's a hadith in Islam, which is deeds are judged by motives. So, like, if you act in a way like that, you always go for the best thing, then you end up, usually people respect you for that. It's like my friends, in a sense, they respect me more for not drinking. Like they appreciate that, like keeping my own thing. But I don't ever say to them, "Oh, you shouldn't drink. You shouldn't be doing this." Like I say, this is why I don't do it. But like,
so there's a difference between explaining why you shouldn't do something and stopping them, like forcefully imposing it. Okay.
So it's like if we integrate into this society by just being an example, and that's what I feel like. That's how I seem to do it, because I get respect for that, and people appreciate that, because I think if we try to impose it on people, like Islam is about freedom, so like we can't take that away from anyone. If they don't believe what we say, then that's fine.
Yeah.
That's their choice.
Okay, cool. I want to get 2 or 3 more points of view. Yeah, if you'd like to.
Yeah, just something personal with regards to myself. I work in a school as a teacher.
Okay.
And the people, talking about people of the West, so to speak, they're normally very respectful and very understanding people. They know that I pray whenever I get a chance at lunchtime, being in a school environment. And they've actually provided me with a place to pray in school. And my colleagues, they actually watch out for me as well when it's time to pray.
Right.
They try and make it a point to stop the children from going into that room, because they know that I'm praying. And coming back to the point where we go out with our colleagues, we have, you know, do we go to the pub with them to have a drink or whatnot? I mean, I'm not going to say that I don't, because there have been times that I've gone, but they do know that I don't drink alcohol.
Yeah.
And they will actually watch out for me themselves. And, you know, they'll say, don't, you know, make sure that doesn't have it. And there's been cases...
Nice to see that, isn't it?
There've been cases where they've actually said, well, can you check if there's any alcohol in there before giving it to me? Right. So it's just a point that I wanted to make there. So.
All right, we just need to wrap up this half of the programme. But do stay with us. In the second half, we're going to be having a look at whether Islam is compatible with democracy and looking more at it from a political perspective. So that's what we're going to be discussing. So stay with us after this short break.
An interlingual channel promoting interfaith dialogue. Worldwide, live and interactive. On satellite television and the internet. This is MTA International.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to part 2 of this edition of Real Talk. The main topic we're focusing on today is trying to find out if Islam is a threat to Western society. And Qudsi, I want to turn to you first of all. In this half of the programme, I want to look at the political systems. Now, particularly from democracy, firstly, can you actually just explain what democracy means?
Well, there's very different conceptions of democracy about what it really means. I mean, when you break it down to its core, actual and philosophical centre, what it means is that those that are in power, those that are governing, must be doing so with the authority of those that they are governing. So it has to have some sort of political legitimacy that the people actually want them to govern. That is what the core of democracy is. Now, there's lots of other debates about, well, what about majoritarian rule? What about human rights? What about if the majority want to persecute a minority? How does that all fit in? The core element of it is that the people in authority have the power of that authority from the people themselves.
Okay. And is that what we see today in the West? Can you describe it sort of Western democracy almost? Or
I mean, it's a version of democracy, definitely, because what it is that people vote to choose who they want to govern them. So to that extent, it's democratic. Obviously, in certain elements, it's not democratic, because if 99% of the people wanted to kill 1% of the remaining 1% of the people, that would be an extremely democratic decision to make.
Right.
But we would say, well, no, in that situation, democracy shouldn't have a role to play, because there are other values as well as democracy.
Okay. Ayaz, turning to you, and where does religion fit in terms of politics and political systems and, running state? Within Islam, does it sort of adhere to one particular political system?
As far as Islam is concerned, Islam does not teach that a certain political system should be adopted. Islam leaves this open. People are free to adopt whatever system works best for them in their situation. However, Islam does present certain principles which are to be adhered to. These principles are principles of justice, as we mentioned in the earlier half of this program, with regards to society as a whole, with regards to economics, with regards to politics. So Islam presents certain teachings which are universal. Actually, they're not religious teachings as such, they're universal.
Can you give examples?
For example, everybody knows that it's a bad thing to kill somebody. It's a good thing not to do so. It's a very bad thing to steal from somebody. And all of these things, these common sense issues of what is right and what is wrong, is accepted by not just religion, but by all people, even who do not have a religion. Hazur Rabbi Rahimullah Ta'ala used to say something very beautiful. He used to say that in actuality, an Islamic state is a secular state. And when we use the word secularism, that needs to be defined. Secularism means that every individual, irrespective of which religion or race he is from, or what religion he is from, he has the right to practice his own set of beliefs within that state, whilst adhering to the overall framework of justice and equality as established by the government.
Okay. Just one point to add on that. I mean, a lot of Muslims out there say, well, Islam is not compatible with democracy, Muslims shouldn't vote, for example, those sorts of things. And what the second Khalifa said quite explicitly, he said that the principle of democracy, so proudly proclaimed by Europe and so much abused today, was first established by the Quran. Now, obviously, we've got to say, well, what did he mean by democracy?
Yeah.
And it seems to be that he meant exactly the same thing that I was saying, that the West says about democracy at its very core, that those people in authority must have that authority from the people. And it's very clear there in the Holy Quran, in Surah An-Nisa, where it says that the sovereignty lies in the people, and it is for the people to entrust that power of authority to those whom they feel it is best to do so. And the people that are in power must adhere to the principles that Ayaz Sab.
Fried, I just want to bring you into the discussion. I mean, obviously we're talking about whether Islam is a threat, and I think a lot of people in this country see Islam as a threat because they look at Islamic states and Islamic countries in the world at the moment, and maybe, democracy is not being practiced there, as we've just talked about these key principles. How can we relate to that, and how can we change that in those Islamic countries? And
I think you've partly answered the question that you've raised there, that those Islamic countries are not abiding by the very principles of Islam that they should be. So every person, citizen of that country, has every right to try and change the system within the country in which they live. And we in Britain would have a right to work and serve the system in which we live. So, for Muslims, they should vote. It's a duty they should vote, because it's part of their faith, in fact, to ensure that they have a just ruling in their country. They also have a freedom and a duty to partake in politics. So there's nothing to stop Muslims engaging in the political process, both as voters and as lawmakers. And that's something that's quite clear. And where you've had in the press coverage of people saying voting is against Islam or democracy is against Islam, I think, as Qudsi explained, that's just not right.
So do you think actually Muslims are to blame in these countries for not bringing about a democratic system, and not, is it because they don't want it there, or just because maybe something else has mainly been opposed onto them, maybe? I mean,
you've got to ask them that, really, I guess, because, Islam is, as we've all said, Islam is very clear. It's not particularly difficult. And there's two basic principles, that the people in power have to have that power on the authority of the people, and as they're governing, they have to govern with justice. That's it. It's not particularly hard, and people can make their own judgments about whether or not they're doing it. As to why they're not doing it, well, you can ask why people commit crimes, you can ask all these sorts of questions. I mean, power corrupts, perhaps.
All right, fair enough. Fried, you talked on this issue of voting, and I remember there was a big campaign telling Muslims not to vote from certain Muslim sects, and I think it would be interesting, turning to the audience now, if I can just get a show of hands, how many of you actually voted or took part in the political procedure here in this country? How many of you would like to? I'm not going to ask you who you voted for, but just who took part. Okay, that's fantastic. So it's a good majority of you. What do you think are the benefits of voting and taking some sort of interest in the political system? If I just take the microphone here, if I could just turn to you, what are the benefits of voting and actually taking part in the political system?
I think we should have a say. This is our chance to have a say as to who governs us. It's very easy for people in their workplaces, around family members. Everybody has a very strong view on the way that the country is running. Everybody has strong views on certain decisions which the government make. And this is the one opportunity which you have to listen to the political parties, study their views, study what they're saying, and actually have your show your way in supporting those views. Yeah. But the problem that I always find is that I always find it difficult. There's always good things that every political party has or says, but I don't tend to 100% agree with with the policies that they're making or creating, and certain things I do agree with, certain things I don't agree with. So that's the kind of difficulties that I find, is basically trying to make a decision as to who I will be supporting, because I don't tend to agree with all the things that they're saying. But even then, I think it's still a good way of showing your support and making sure that you feel comfortable that you're being run by a government who you back. Okay,
and the gentleman next to you, I mean, as a Muslim, why is it important to vote? If you just tell me.
I think it's important to vote because we live in a country of freedom. We have that choice that we can make, and we, as a new Muslim, as a new convert, coming from that society of Christianity and people who don't abide by the laws and don't take anything, don't take regard to any in the news, and then becoming a Muslim and embracing Islam, you feel that peace in your heart. And especially living in this country and you see the news, you want to act, you want to have your voice heard by anyone, even if it's your own community or non-religious people. So the choice is there for anyone to take at any time. And everyone has their voice and everyone has their opinion, and it can always help whatever the situation.
Okay, Free, just if you'd like to add something onto that, please.
We've talked about voting, but democracy in the democratic state doesn't end with voting the government in. You can have different governments, and like you said, you may not agree with everything they stand for, but that's not the end of the process. And I think Muslims, as active citizens, have every right to engage in that process beyond that. So if there's certain laws that need to be changed or need to be introduced, you have every right to lobby for that. And it's not something unique to Muslims. The Christian parties, the other religious groups, people of no faith, all have certain issues they take up. The issue about smoking, should cigarettes be sold to children, issues to do with alcohol, etc. So there's every right as a Muslim citizen to engage in the process beyond just putting the vote in the ballot box. And I think that's all part of having a society where you have your say in what you want the ruling government to do.
I mean, there are more Muslims getting involved in politics, not only from voting, but actually running as MPs and getting into politics. Is that something which is a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I mean, a lot of people who see Islam as a threat are worried that they're coming in to change constitutions from an Islamic perspective.
I think the issue is not whether Muslims are becoming more engaged. I mean, the real issue is, are good people running the country? And I think we shouldn't get focused on whether they're a Muslim or not. We want to be focused on whether they're good for the country or not. If they happen to be Muslim, fine. If they happen to be Christian, fine. I don't think we should measure success by the number of Muslims in government, the number of Muslims being active in lobbying. I think what we want is good, active citizens working for a positive future.
Okay.
I mean, it's a cop-out, really, to turn around and say, oh, I'm not going to get involved in politics because I disagree with it. Right? I mean, for those Muslims that stand up and say the country is doing bad things and therefore I'm going to exclude myself from the political process, I mean, it's nonsense, really, because you say, well, then do something about it. I mean, if you really care that passionately, then engage in it. I mean, here is a system which is providing you the opportunity to vote, to take part in the democratic process, to write articles, to publish those articles, to speak your voice. and for you to turn around and say, no, I'm just gonna ignore it all and say it's all wrong and it's all bad. I mean, let's forget about being un-Islamic. It's just silly.
Yeah, I was just turning to you. I mean, looking at it from the Islamic perspective, are there any guidelines on how we should engage with democracy and what should we be careful of and what
absolutely
within that?
As far as certain religious principles are concerned, let's say promiscuity or alcoholism, these things, these are something separate. Islam does not permit that when you come into a different society with different laws and rules and regulations or values and beliefs, that you should do away with all of your religious principles. There are certain things which Islam is clear about, that these are the things that you should do, these are the things which are prohibited. So we keep that there. As far as engaging with democracy is concerned, the Holy Quran very clearly says that you should engage in democracy. That's why the Holy Quran says that you should give the trust to those people who are deserving of that. Inna Allaha ya'murukum an tu'addul amanati ila ahliha. Give the trust to those people who are rightful and who deserve that trust, and Allah is ordering that. Inna Allaha ya'murukum. So for somebody to not take part in the political system and put his hands up and say, because I don't agree with certain principles, therefore I'm going to completely exclude myself from the society, this is completely un-Islamic, as Qudsi has mentioned. So Islam teaches us that when we come into a society, we should engage in that society, we should interact, and we should make a difference to that society with whatever good we can contribute.
Right. I want to get some more points of view from the audience. I'm just going to move over here. How can you engage within this democratic system, and what are the boundaries and what are the issues with it?
I think the society is willing to listen to us. If you look at your past experiences at work or outside in the society, so it is a Muslim person's responsibility to go out and engage with people and show how beautiful the religion of Islam is. So that's the best way to go out and engage and show that Islam is not a bad religion.
Okay. Yas, I'm just turning back to you. I know we mentioned it earlier on in the program, but in terms of protesting, because that seems, especially in this country, whenever Muslims disagree about something, they go out and they, like the gentleman here mentioned, they'll start burning something and shouting slogans, which, are generally quite abusive even. They don't hold back. What are the correct ways to disagree, and how should we show that disagreement?
I think it's ironic that many of the people who do this raise a voice because they believe that their country is doing something wrong or other people are doing something wrong to them. And then they go out and protest and burn tires and destroy shops, and then what they're doing is they're causing more harm to their own country. Where's the logic in that? Islam doesn't teach this. Islam says that you have the right to disagree, but voice your opinion in a manner which is respectful, which is conducive to the better health of society as a whole. And we see the Holy Prophet ﷺ, he lived in Mecca for 13 years. And he was persecuted after he claimed to be a prophet. But he did not rise up against that state. He did not begin killing all of those people or taking physical force. Some of the companions even came to him and said, "Oh, Holy Prophet, before Islam, we were so awe-inspiring that people could barely even look at us. When they would come before us, they would put their eyes down. And now we're dragged in the streets. Let us do something." And the Holy Prophet said, "No, I am not permitted to do this." And then eventually, the Holy Prophet ﷺ spent his time in Mecca teaching people, explaining Islamic values in a very respectful, loving manner. But then when it came to a point that it wasn't being heard, then he left that society, because that society was causing him harm. So this is what Islam teaches us, that be respectful to your society because they are a part of you. This is why the Holy Prophet says that Sayyidu qawmin khadimuhum, that a true leader of a nation is the one who serves the nation. So I don't think this is called serving, that you should go out and burn tires and cause harm to your own land where you live in. So this is what Islam says.
There's a common sense point as well. I mean, let's say I disagreed with you on something. If I came to your house and I started smashing your windows and started shouting at you and abusing you, you're not going to turn around and say, "Oh, Qudsi's got a really good point, let me listen to him now." You're going to think, that guy's an idiot, I'm not going to listen to what he says at all. But if you're able to treat someone with the principles of Islam, of love, of kindness, of respect, if I came to you and said, "Look, Ghaalib, I don't agree with what you're saying for these reasons. What do you think? And I engage with you. You're much more likely to listen to someone else. So people just going around smashing things, all it is, it's a sign of their own insecurity. It's a sign of their own incapability of expressing themselves in a dignified manner.
Fried, how would you respond to that as well?
I think I was just going to pick up on the point that you said most Muslims would react in terms of protests and actually react negatively in terms of violence. And again, I'd say that's not true.
Okay.
And there are many Muslims who lobby peacefully. So we have examples of how we as a community have lobbied for change in the UK, whether it's on human rights laws, whether it's on local issues. And it doesn't make the headlines, but it does make a difference.
Right.
So I think for Muslims, that's the role model that we have, as was described, that you respectfully engage with the society around you, and that's how you will achieve change.
Okay, just taking the discussion further on, I want to look at the role of the media in all of this as well, because, I mean, as you correctly, corrected me, that it's not the majority of people protesting like this, but obviously the reason I think that is because that's what I see in the media. How can we use the media in a positive way to actually show people the positive sides of Islam, specifically looking at, integration and political systems and whether Islam is a threat or not? How can we put forward our message in the press properly?
I think, well, the media certainly has a role to play in promoting integration and promoting harmony. And unfortunately, you can't control the media. However much you wish you could, nobody can control the media. So it's an uphill task constantly. But the way you can do it is to engage with them, and when there's a need for an opinion on Islamic issues, to make sure that you present Islam and its true values. I think beyond that, I mean, we as a community have been engaging in sort of awareness raising through advertising, which has caught the media's attention, and through that raised awareness about true Islam. So I think there's positive ways you can engage, and we have been doing so. But unfortunately, there's no one way that will achieve success to say from now onwards Islam will be portrayed positively, or in fact anything will be portrayed positively. The media works on the basis of selling stories, so it's not just Islam that falls short on that. If you have hooliganism in football stadiums, it doesn't mean that all people who go to watch football matches are hooligans. The English Defence League that has protests and violence related to it doesn't mean that all English people are violent and have protests in that manner. So I think the media will pick up stories of interest because it needs to sell. All we can do is play our part in presenting it with a good model and good stories for it to pick up.
Because do you think, I mean, obviously people always tend to blame the media for everything to a certain extent. I mean, they can't be to blame if Muslims are protesting in these ways, and what we discussed about burning things and street protests like that. I mean, that is what some Muslims are doing, and they're doing it openly. And, people from a more moderate background, more liberally minded, maybe, are we not putting forward our point of view loud enough? Is that the reason we're not being heard at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, there is this point to say, well, whoever shouts the loudest gets heard. But I think, it goes back to kind of some of the discussion that we were having earlier before the break about it's a two-way street. And so, yes, there is a duty upon Muslims to do two things. One, examine themselves and examine what Islam actually says. I mean, part of the problem is many Muslims don't know that you can vote. They just simply say, well, we've been told you can't, or so-and-so said this, that's all we know. So there's a duty on Muslims to learn what Islam actually says and how they should actually behave and then act in that manner. But I think equally there's a duty upon non-Muslims who are seeing the negative portrayal of Islam in the media to use their own sense. I mean, everyone knows how the media operates. Everyone knows the exaggerations or the stereotypes that are created. And so for an average non-Muslim to see the presentation of Islam in a negative manner before coming to absolute conclusions that Islam is bad or Islam is a threat, to actually a duty upon them to engage and say, well, do I know any Muslims? Let me speak to them. Let me investigate. Let me find. I mean, again, it's an Islamic principle about the search for knowledge, the search for truth. The truth is there about what Islam is really about. There are negative perceptions, there are negative interpretation, and then there's the real Islam. And it's up to every individual, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, to examine all the options out there and say, well, what is the truth?
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, we're running a bit short on time. I really want to get some more points of view from the audience members. Maybe someone hasn't spoken yet. If I could just get your points of view. I mean, we're talking right now about the media. If I just take a seat here, there's so many negative portrayals of Islam in the media, and like you as an individual, how can you sort of change those negative perceptions and show the real Islam?
Just to act like a Muslim, to what you see in the media, to act like opposite, not to go around blowing stuff up and acting like the terrorist. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the way Islam is portrayed in the media, do you think that's just a minority? I mean, you're living in this country. There's people watching the program around the world, and they maybe only hear about the terrorists in the UK, or Islamic fundamentalism that seems to be so much of a threat. But you, as a Muslim living in the UK, what's it like here? I mean, do you get that mix with minorities, majority of Muslims with those views?
Where you will feel like some people will feel like that to like want to blow something up or like do that, but
I mean, if you disagree, how would you rather like vent your anger or
like talk peacefully? Like just the way that you act is how people will see you, and yeah.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Yeah, go.
Being an example. I mean, that was the exact way that the Prophet acted. He acted as an exemplar for all mankind. He said, well, look, I'm going to behave like this, and this is my example to you. And that's what I think, I mean, as much as the media is a problem, I mean, it's a grassroots thing. I mean, my parents, for example, their neighbours are a Jewish family. And so whenever it's a Muslim festival, my parents will take over something they've cooked to their neighbours, and just as a sign of warmth. And equally, when it's a Jewish festival, they'll bring over a cake that they've made or something like that. So I think that's where a real grassroots change can be taken place, not just by the media saying, oh, we've got it wrong now, we now see what Islam really is like, because whether that's going to happen or not is an open question. Okay. But what we can all do is be examples and models in ourselves and say, well, this is the real Islam lived, not just in words, not just on a piece of paper, but this is it lived.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, we're a bit short on time, and we've got about 5 minutes left, but I know there's some people who want to add in some more points of views, so I'm going to hand over to you. What would you like to... I mean, looking at the whole general discussion that we've had today, looking at integration and democracy and whether Islam is a threat to the values of Western society, what would you like to add?
Just to add to the point that was raised earlier about the media,
right.
What I would say is that media is basically led by demand, public demand. So they will only put down in the papers and give out on the television, on the news and broadcasts only what they feel will have public demand, what people want to read about, what people want to know about. So unfortunately, public demand at the moment is more on the negative aspects of life and culture and what happens in the society.
Right.
So I think where we need to concentrate is on changing that and bring into action or things like why is people want to read and know about terrorists? Why don't they want to read about more things to do with peace and harmony? So that's where we need to sort of bring the attention of people first.
Yeah.
And when people are more interested in peace and in harmony, then media will automatically come there and try and display that.
Fantastic. I want to get some more points of view. Anyone with sort of closing remarks, if you like? Did you have a point? Yeah.
No, I think just following on from what Osama said, I totally agree. It is down to what the media, it's not always their fault. They will publish what the people want to hear, and right now that's what the people want to hear. So it's our job to change that to some extent, and what methods of changing that are the work that we do for charities, for example. We do a lot. The MD Jamaat does a lot for various charities. We have obviously Humanity First, which is very well widespread out there now. We have our own charity. It's registered charity now as well. But within our region, we try to for example, we do blood donations, and whenever we do these kinds of events, we do try to invite the media and the press to show them what we're doing and who we are and why we're doing it. And I think that definitely has a very positive effect.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, just quickly, if you'd like to add in some sort of concluding remarks to the whole discussion that we've had today.
Yeah, just moving away from the media and just talking about our own roles and responsibilities within society. I think sometimes we forget that when we talk to people about our beautiful religion, it adds an extra flavor when we talk peacefully, we have a smile on our face. They're just general basic etiquettes, but sometimes we forget. And that's how we can differentiate ourselves from the other so-called mainstream Islam who are very sort of violent in the way that they come across. I'll just give you an example. In my local high street, I saw somebody, and as 3 or 4 ladies were walking past, they were shouting at them, saying that, do you know that the way you're dressed, you're going to go straight to hell, and you know how strong the fire is, etc., etc. So I looked at that, and then I saw a camera crew coming, and they were actually filming this.
Really?
And unfortunately, this
that's what gets the attention of the media sometimes.
That's correct.
Isn't it?
So the way that we should portray Islam should be much different from that, and we should just
to leave it there. Just finally, I want to turn to the panel and get some concluding remarks from you. Kudsi, first of all, looking at the whole discussion that we've had today, for the viewers watching at home, what are the main tenets that you want them to leave from this discussion?
I mean, the question that we're considering is Islam a threat to the West? Clearly not. I think that's evident both in the discussion that we've had here. It's evident on someone who looks at Islam properly. It's not to say it's easy for Muslims to just simply fit in, because there are difficulties, there are things to struggle with about understanding your own religion, how you should fit in, how you shouldn't fit in. But really, Islam is such a beautiful religion, and its principles are totally and completely compatible with the best of the West, and all it needs is a better understanding on the part of Western non-Muslims and Muslims themselves to create that kind of harmony and to make that connection.
Right, okay, Fried, just very briefly, what are your concluding remarks from today's discussion?
Just 2 things I'd like to pick up. One was about this issue about the media. I think the response, certainly from the UK and the Muslim community, is one of the responses been to have an outreach programme where we're delivering leaflets door to door. We've delivered 1 million so far. Now, despite everything the media says, I'll give you one anecdote, which is quite short, that a person received a leaflet through the door. He sent us an email straight away saying, this is terrible, you Muslims are blowing up people around the world and now you're promoting your hatred in the UK.
Right.
2 minutes later, he sent another email saying, I've read your leaflet, I think you're doing a very good job, and may God support your work.
Oh, really?
So this is the sort of outreach and engagement that we can do, and at an individual level, if we explain to people what Islam is about, I think you'll find that people are open-minded, so that despite everything that we see around us, we can make a difference. So it's up to us to engage in that process. And lastly, the question about, is Islam a threat to the West? If we define the West as liberal values, about the work for charity, about the doing of goodness, I think there's also a question out there that is the West, as it stands today, a threat to the West itself? Because there's a question, is the West changing into something which it wasn't or is perceived to be? Okay. So it's not just an issue about Islam.
Maybe that's a topic for a future programme. We'll have a look into that. Yas, just very briefly, from an Islamic perspective, what are the main topics that we covered here today that you want the viewers to be even mindful of?
At the end of the day, we can have these discussions forever and ever. We'll go on forever. What does Islam teach? How does it integrate with societies? Do societies benefit from Islamic teaching? Put all of this to one side. At the end, all I will say is that as far as this program is concerned, we've elaborated on what Islamic principles truly are. And of course, those principles are distorted in the media, but the media isn't fully responsible for that, because there is a group of Muslims, a minority, but there is a group of Muslims who act wrongly and against Islamic teachings, and the media pounces on it and presents it to the world. So at the end of the day, the only thing that I would like to mention is that we need to work on ourselves. We need to improve ourselves, and we all, in our own individual right, if we try to become better Muslims, then we don't even have to say anything.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people sometimes forget that there's an Islamic principle of la ikraha fi din, that there's no compulsion in religion, and I don't think people can really impose Islam on other people. I think our audience should maybe keep that in mind, and Muslims ourselves, you know, we have to be mindful of this as well. So to the viewers watching this at home, you've heard what we've had to say here in the studio, and we want to hear your points of view as well. Don't forget, you can email us on realtalk@mta.tv. Our official website is www.mta.tv/realtalk, where you can find clips from previous programs. And if you are linked into our Twitter page as well, the details are there for you at the bottom of the page. You'll be able to find out the new topics for discussions in future Real Talk programs. We've had a really fantastic discussion today. I want to thank all of you for turning up, and also I want to thank all the volunteers here behind the scenes who work on this program and who make this program possible. I want to thank all of them. as well. Just finally, you know, we as Muslims, we have a responsibility in this country. We have to be a positive part of this community, and we have to make a decision. Do we want to live in a society of coercion or cohesion? I think that's a major issue for us to really ponder on. I hope you can join me next time for more Real Talk, but until then, Assalamu alaikum.